first step is humility, and perhaps even vulnerability, and showing that vulnerability. And that's certainly something that I've observed some of the leaders that I look up to in organizations, something that they display that I think is really valuable for people to see. The quickest way to lose trust is to pretend that you know something that you don't, and therefore the quickest way to build and maintain that trust is just be really honest about what you do and don't know. I do not prescribe to the idea that company culture is 5, 6, 7 words on a mouse mat on everyone's desk. That is not what a company culture is. Leadership isn't about you, it's about your team, about the team that you're leading. It's about the people that you're working with. So when things go well, you credit the people who made it happen, and more often than that's not you. And when things go not so well, that's when the leaders need to step forward, take responsibility.
Hey, just before we jump into the show, got a little favour to ask you. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, please make sure you are subscribed on the platform of your choice. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever platform that might be. The more people who subscribe and the more people who like and rate the show, the more we give you an opportunity to have some great takeaways. It doesn't take you too long, and it would be a great help to us to help us grow the show. For now, that's it. Enjoy today's recording. Good afternoon, Dave. Thank you very much for coming and joining us on the Business Takeaway podcast. It's great to have you on. Do you want to give a bit of background to who you are and a bit of background to how you find yourself here today?
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, hello, Ben, and thank you for the opportunity to come on the podcast. My name is Dave, Dave Coul. That really is my surname. I'm the Chief Executive of Stage Electrics Group, which is the parent company of 4 businesses: Stage Electrics, Northern Light, Just Rigging and Inspection Scotland, and Willow Communications. And together we're a group of technical solutions businesses that work across really quite a wide range of sectors, from the arts, broadcast, corporate, education and entertainment, through to hospitality, land-based gaming, leisure, stadiums, themed attractions, and many more. In practical terms, our work spans the supply, integration and installation of audio, video, lighting, rigging and staging equipment, through to the ongoing inspection and testing of much of that equipment and infrastructure. And we also develop our own proprietary gaming venue control and digital signage software. If you zoom right out, what does all that mean? It means that we help our clients create engaging experiences in the places and spaces where people typically gather to maybe socialize, perform, learn, and play. I joined Stage Electrics in 2020, and before that spent more than 20 years in the broadcast media industry, starting my career as a T-boy in the local radio station. And by the time we sold that business in 2019, I was the group content director and working with teams across the UK responsible for the content that all of that company's radio stations are distributed each week across its analog and digital platforms. And we reached about 2 million people each week with that content. So 20 years in broadcast media before transitioning into the industry in which I now work. I guess the two things that have been consistent throughout my career, first, the end customer, if you will, whether that be our customer or the customer's customer, has always been an audience of one kind or another, whether that was a listener to a radio station, and a consumer of content online, or now a consumer of the content that our customers create through the technology that we provide. And then I guess the second consistent thing for me in my career has been the success, really, of every business that I've ever worked in has been driven by a company culture. More than strategy, systems and processes, I've found the way that people live a company's culture is ultimately what drives, or indeed doesn't drive, that company's success. And at the risk of stating the bleeding obvious, what the business does really doesn't matter. There is one fundamental similarity between all businesses, and that's people. So whether it's broadcast, radio, entertainment, technology, hospitality, retail, manufacturing, professional services, we're all in people business. The products, the services change, sure. The sectors we serve change. Totally get that. But ultimately, the success of a business comes down to how effectively leaders can attract, retain, develop, inspire, and support people to do their best work. And that's where my focus has really been, certainly for the last 2 decades. And in my current role is one of my primary focuses, as you would expect, every day.
A great introduction. We've all started in the T-boy role, which is it's a great place to start in this industry. You said you started in this sort of media entertainment, that world. The radio background, it obviously has some similarities, but coming into a supply company doing installations is very different in Stage Electrics. What led you to that world, and how did you find that transition into something you weren't sort of aware of, or much probably aware of at that moment in time?
How did I find it? In the broadest sense, I have found, however you choose to describe the sector that Stage Electrics Group and its companies occupy. There's lots of different words you could use for that. It's very similar actually to broadcast media. It's performance based in one way or another. So actually, whilst it is different in terms of the product, the service that those businesses were ultimately providing, the similarities between people, there weren't many differences actually. I found people in those sectors to be passionate, hugely engaged in what they do, and therefore the transition was actually quite easy for me.
Was there anything when you walked through the Stage Electric stores in Bristol on day one that you'd got a preconception ideas that 90 days, 120 days, 3-4 months, whatever later you had wiped and gone, yeah, that's not right? Or was it pretty much as you expected to walk through?
It was both everything I expected and everything that I didn't expect. I'd done some work with Stage Electrics before I was appointed what was then in 2020 managing director. I had done some, in the broadest sense, consultancy work in the summer, autumn leading up to my appointment. And therefore I had a bit of an understanding of Stage Electrics. So probably knew a bit more than you would if you were just starting on day one without any background or context. And then, yeah, like I say, it was sort of everything I expected and everything that I didn't. And that for me has been a very positive experience, actually, the last 6 years leading the business as I do.
How do you earn the trust of people who know more about the specific business or industry than you do? Because that's a challenge.
Yeah, I think it is, depending upon how you approach it. So I think both consciously and if I'm really honest with you, my subconscious did as much thinking about this before I arrived, because often it's only on reflection and when you're asked a question like this, when you really sort of stop and think about it. How did I approach it? I think first step is humility and perhaps even vulnerability and showing that vulnerability. And that's certainly something that I've observed some of the leaders that I look up to in organizations that I've both worked in and indeed have just observed from afar. Something that they display that I think is really valuable for people to see, leaders being vulnerable. So humility and vulnerability. And I guess when I joined Stage Electrics, it was very obvious, as I've just explained, I knew a little bit about it before I actually arrived in my then role as managing director, was that there were decades and decades of technical expertise, and the people in that business knew far more than I did about professional lighting, audio, video, and every other aspect of production technology, as you've just alluded to. And 6 years later, that is still true. And frankly, that's exactly how it should be. The business has always had and continues to have an abundance of what I believe is industry leading technical expertise. My role wasn't and isn't to add more of that technical expertise. My role is to help provide clarity, direction, and context, really, to work with colleagues to create an environment through working with them where that expertise can flourish, where talented people can do their best work, and where we could, I guess, collectively then deliver for our customers. So I've never tried to, or at least I hope I haven't, I've never tried to suggest I'm something that I'm not. Instead, I've been very honest about what I did and didn't know when I joined. And I think the really interesting thing there, and I've spoken about this a couple of times before, answering a sort of similar question. In doing so, that honesty created a sort of space for authentic curiosity. I asked far more questions in the first 100 days, first year, first 3 years actually of being the managing director or chief executive of this company, because partly I genuinely wanted to learn. Frankly, I needed to learn, but also because, you will have seen it as well, Ben, you go into a new business and fresh eyes can often see things that those closer to a business are no longer able to see. And in asking probably more questions than someone joining from within the industry would have, what quickly happened, I guess, was, and candidly, very honestly, unintentionally, I think that led to an accelerant in empowering people, because it became very obvious to everyone that I was working with within the business that I needed them as much as they needed me. And that, I think, leveled the playing field a little bit as well, because they knew things that I didn't, and I knew things that they didn't. And if we could work together, actually, that was going to create something really special, which I think we've gone on to do. So that curiosity combined with a willingness to trust people, a need to trust people, to delegate authority, responsibility from day one, because I didn't have all the answers, really helped build that trust. And I guess, I think colleagues could see that I wasn't trying to become a technical subject matter expert on anything that relates to the technical components of our business. I was just trying to understand the business, support them, and help them and the company succeed. So I guess, what am I trying to say? In summary, I guess the quickest way to lose trust is to pretend that you know something that you don't. And therefore, the quickest way to build and maintain that trust is just be really honest about what you do and don't know. Explain why you're here, how you're going to help and how you're going to support your colleagues. And then I guess, crucially, do that. Leaders talk a lot. I talk a lot, as you're now learning, Ben. Talk is cheap, as they say, isn't it? It's the action that follows. So I hope that's answered the question. I was just really honest about what I did and didn't know. And I understood from day one what my role was. And my role was not to be an expert in the field per se. It was to play the role of a leader of that organization, which I enjoy doing, and I hope I do a good job.
When you walked in that day, the first few days, did you, to go and do that authentic trust and building, did you then go and spend time? Did you go out with your install teams, go out with your testing teams and try and learn it from on the job, in essence, live a day in their shoes? I mean, whatever cliche you want to say, but is that how you went and did that with the teams?
Well, it would ordinarily have been exactly what I would have done then. But I joined.
We were in COVID, weren't we? So, yeah.
Yes, we were.
So another challenge to that, right?
Yeah. So I joined officially on the 1st of December 2020. And if I'm honest, it is probably for us all now a bit of a blur. We were definitely in one form of a lockdown or another. And as a result, people were working from home. So I wasn't able to spend time physically in the same room with people for what ended up in some cases being 9, even 12 months in some cases. So the first thing I did, I joined on the 1st of December. At that time, we employed just over 100 people, and I committed to speak to every single person in our organization between the day I started and the day we broke for Christmas, which I think that year was something like the 22nd of December. So excluding weekends, I had about 2.5 weeks to speak to everybody in the organization. And I set about calling every single person in the business, introducing myself, explaining who I was, what I hoped I might be able to do in terms of helping and supporting them. Particularly then, if you take yourself back to December 2020, all the uncertainty that existed, particularly in businesses where we do the sorts of things that we do and have been so heavily impacted by COVID. And then I guess transmit and receive. I was receiving as much information as I probably could over that 2.5 weeks. We broke for Christmas. That allowed me to really take on board everything that I'd heard, start write things down, and then began to start planning in the January of 2021. But it wasn't until September 2021 that we brought the entire company together. And that meant that physically shaking the hands of some of the people that I work with and people I work now very, very closely with took 10 months, which was just odd when you think about it now. But yeah, it was a slightly different start to joining a business than it ordinarily would be. But actually, you just adapt, right? And you just do what you can do, and you go into overdrive in terms of communicating. And we put some things in place to try and create a sense of team, even though it was really disparate, and make sure that we were on the front foot in terms of answering colleagues' questions so that they could keep customers, wherever applicable, informed as well.
And I was about to sort of ask about what you did on the team building, because one of the things as a leader, right, is that soft skills. It's the let's finish work and go to the pub or go for lunch or whatever, which if you're not able to look some of the people, shake their hands and look them in the eye, that's not going to be possible for 9 months. But you've still got to put a message across to them in those 9 months. So, what did you adapt differently to try and get those soft skills and try and get Dave as a human rather than Dave as an MD or Dave as the CEO across to them?
I think, fundamentally, I was just myself, and attempted at least to communicate, and probably over communicated in comparison to what I would have done if it were under normal circumstances. And I think, really what that did was just give people more opportunity to spend more time talking to me and me talking to them, and us getting to know one another. Practical things that we did at the time, none of it particularly innovative, which is now one of our core values, was introduce newsletters. There were games and all sorts of things being played on Teams and stuff, and I would attend those things, not because I had to, but frankly because I wanted to, and so often enjoyed them. And I think we just worked really hard at the time as a senior executive, because it certainly wasn't just me. It was a senior executive and a very good senior executive team they are, as are the management team. We just worked really hard to make sure that the touch points with our colleagues were the most valuable they possibly could be. Of course, at the same time, you had some people working from home. You had even more furloughed as well. So it was a difficult start. Delayed some of the things that I would have frankly done earlier if I had if I joined in normal circumstances. But I think it worked out quite well, taking the approach that we did.
You sort of talk about a culture point. One of the things is like you going into a business when you inherit an existing culture, did you go and I suppose the question is, did you come in beforehand and somebody says to you, we need to fix the culture at Stage Electrics? I'm not saying you did or didn't, but is that one of the things was said? Or when you inherit that culture, what do you needs protecting, and what do you think needs changing, and how do you then adapt that and look at that?
Yeah, so when I joined, I was the MD of Stage Electrics in Northern Light. We've since gone on to acquire Just Rigging and Inspection Scotland and Willow Communications. But at the time, it was Stage Electrics and Northern Light. Stage Electrics was founded in 1979, and Northern Light was actually founded before that. So we're talking about two businesses that have traded for 30, 40 plus years. And whatever preconceived ideas I think anyone has of a business, if a business, particularly in today's economic environment, has traded for, forget 30, 40 years, 5, 10 years, and is trading profitably, then there's clearly some strengths embedded within the culture. And I think the first thing to do is recognize that there's going to be behaviors, there's going to be relationships, standards, ways of working that have helped those businesses succeed. So the first job really is to understand those properly before deciding what needs to change. So for me, that meant asking questions and listening really carefully. What did people feel proud of? What did the customers of those two companies at the time value most? Where was the organization consistently performing well? Caveat being, it was uncertain times because of COVID, and therefore nothing was normal. But in doing so, you then begin to pay attention to the stories that people tell. My experience is that culture often reveals itself through the stories that get repeated. You'll recognize this, when you go into a business, whether it's when you're working with or working for. It's those stories that sort of shine a light on the moments that people remember or the moments that people want to forget, the things that people are really proud to talk about, and indeed the things that people don't want to talk about. And that leads really nicely to the second part of the equation, which is, where is the friction then? So we'll identify what's working well. Now let's look at where's the friction? What are the behaviors that are slowing people down, slowing the business down? What habits have become normal that frankly no longer serve the business? So for me, it wasn't really about, what should we change? It was, what is helping us succeed? Right, we need to protect that, to your point, Ben. But then what's stopping us from becoming better? The good to great story. Let's remove those blockers. And that's where we'll focus, removing those blockers and protecting what's helping us succeed. And that gives birth then to a culture that we have today, really. You understand both sides of that equation. You start to separate the culture in terms of what needs protecting and what needs challenging and changing. You challenge and change what needs changing, and you protect what needs protecting. And we ended up through that body of work actually using 5 words to define our company culture through the use of core values. So professional, considerate, honest, collaborative, and innovative. They're the sort of 5 North Stars for us in terms of how we seek to work. We'll always be professional. We'll always be considerate. We'll always be honest. We'll always be collaborative. We'll always seek to be innovative, particularly in an industry like we are doing the sorts of things that we do. And that protected what was great, but it also addressed some of those things that needed to be challenged.
And you talk about those 5 key words. Were those words that were developed with everyone in the organization? Was that a senior leadership type thing? Or how did you go about deciding what you've obviously listened to everyone, but how have you gone about getting from listening and then putting that culture that everyone can buy into as part of that journey? Because it's quite a big journey from there to 5 words that everyone can get.
Yes, absolutely. Listening, lots and lots of listening. And whether this was the right or wrong thing to do, I think it was at the time, at least, the right thing to do. We took all of the data really, that came from those conversations. And as I say, it wasn't just conversations I was having, it was conversations that the senior executive were having, managers were having. We took all of that information and we brain dumped words that would help us protect what was great, but also help us challenge and change those things that we needed to. And through what was fundamentally a senior executive brainstorming session, we defined those 5 words. We defined what we, as the most senior managers in the business, wanted this company to be and not to be. And that started with over 100 words. We got down to 5. Took us the best part of 2 days, camped out in a hotel just outside Bristol. Then we met with the management team and we introduced that to them, explained why, had them challenge it, and we debated whether or not some words should change, some words should be added or not. And then we set about with our managers, introducing them to every single person in the company. So we have, since we first did that, every year at Stage Electrics, we now do this with the businesses that we've since acquired. Every year we close the business for a day and we spend a day talking about our culture, our values, marking our homework in terms of what we said we were going to do. Have we done it? How well have we done it? What do we still need to do to improve our business? So it was a collaborative piece of work, but it was ultimately led by the senior executive. And I think that's frankly important, particularly take yourself back to 2020, 2021, that uncertainty. I think people want and sometimes absolutely need clarity. And that came from going, this is who we are. We've listened to you. This is what we want to do. And this is where we're going to go. And we all need to work together to do that. And that was the approach that we took. And appreciate I'm biased. I think it worked.
And those 5 words, are they, you can sometimes go into businesses and you can go in and buy the water cooler, there's a word, and there's behind every senior manager, there's a word. How are they reinforced? Or is it you think the culture is so much there that actually that it's just people live by it? And I went to the warehouse and everyone in your warehouse would be able to say, these are our 5 words. Or, how do you keep that message going? Because it's great to have the words, but only works if it carries on long term, right?
Yeah. So we do have them on the wall. But I do not prescribe to the idea that a company culture is 5, 6, 7 words on a mouse mat on everyone's desk. That is not what a company culture is. That is management and leadership thinking, yeah, we ticked the culture box. I do think that you want a visual reminder of what it is we seek to achieve by working together. So we have those words on the walls of every business unit that we have across the UK. And that's a really useful tool. One of the things that both the company I'm at the moment and in previous companies that I've observed is, particularly when you're bedding a new culture in, having those words as a visual reminder is helpful. Just they themselves are a visual reminder, but they can also become a really useful tool in the moment for colleagues to quite literally point at the wall and go, how professional is that? Are we being as collaborative as we said we could be? Often, and I'm all for it, by the way, some of it's even done in jest. And I think that's really powerful, because never is a true word spoken in jest, right? So actually, you end up having conversations about your culture, about your core values, because you've got that visual reminder of them on the wall. That in itself is not enough. You need to do all the additional work that we do, whether that be closing the business for a day, focusing exclusively on our company culture and our core values, developing our understanding of what they mean in terms of their practical effect. But I do think a visual reminder of them is useful, but that is just a tiny bit of what leads to people actually living a company culture.
You touched on it a little bit previous, but you bought Willow 25, I want to say?
Yes, yeah, 2025, September 2025.
So, and just rigging Services Scotland before that, when those businesses have come in, they've come in with a culture. So you've developed the Stage Electrics Northern Light culture. This is how it is. They come in. do you try and impose the Stage Electrics and Northern Light culture onto them, or do you try and take them and merge it more together in a format? How does that acquisition culture happen? Because that's another big seismic change that could have happened to Stage Electrics Northern Light.
Yes, it's a really good question. What we've done so far, and you'll have to speak to my colleagues, Ben, for them to tell you whether or not it's been the right thing or not. And I think, this is credit to the senior executive of Stage Electrics, or what were the senior executive, then they're now the group senior executive, and the management team of Stage Electrics and Northern Light. Such was the quality of work that they did around defining those 5 core values. We're yet to find a situation where they don't encompass everything that needs protecting within those businesses that we've acquired, but also they also do what's needed in terms of often challenging and changing some of those habits like any business would have that need to be. So we have had those businesses that we've acquired adopt our core values in terms of those that originate from Stage Electrics. And as a result, they've become our group core values. Like I said, you'd need to speak to my colleagues about whether or not that was the right thing to do or not. I think where it would get not more difficult, but the conversation becomes more complex. Both of the businesses that we've acquired to date didn't have 5 or 6, 7 core values. I think if a business did, that then becomes a slightly different conversation, because what we weren't doing was rubbing out words on a wall and putting our words up. We were simply going, look, these are the words that pretty much say what it is you say you are and you want to be. So we just use these to help really define that. So I think the conversation probably easier because we haven't acquired a business yet that has its own specific core values that aren't ours.
And of those sort of key initiatives and things, you got the key words, but are there key initiatives you've brought in that you've had a bigger impact to you as a group and a business than you expected to have?
I think the culture itself had the biggest impact, because I could spend days talking to you about it and really what it's done for colleague, customer, company alike. But there's the culture. Yeah, look, we've introduced over the course of the last 5-6 years, I think some quite generous work perks, whether that be company-wide bonus schemes, giving back days where people can take days off in the year to give back to their local community, through to buying more holiday, bursaries for them to, or for the company to cover the cost of them learning and developing a new skill. So we've done lots of those perhaps more traditional, but I think quite generous sort of work perk incentives, which for sure helps. There's no two ways about it. But I think it's fundamentally the culture. I think, back to one of your earlier questions about, how did you begin that journey? How did you embed that company culture? I guess the thing that we've done that's probably had the biggest impact, and I'm afraid, Ben, this is not sexy. I work with a guy called Jonathan Bradley. He works now with people across our organization. He's a management leadership and coaching specialist. He helps develop me and my colleagues and our skills in those areas and many others. And he refers to it as give people a good darn listening to. And I think probably what we did was we listened at scale, but recognized that that's only really part of the first part of a 3-part process. So you need to listen, you then need to action that, and then you need to campaign or communicate what it is that you've actioned, and not necessarily always in that order. So we invested significant effort in understanding how people actually experience the business, rather than how we as managers and leaders thought that people experience the business, because let's be frank, in almost every business, they're going to be slightly different, sometimes very different. And what this created was an even more, and I underline that, even more engaged team, because there wasn't a team that wasn't engaged. It was just a team that becomes even more engaged, because people could see that their voices were beginning to influence decisions. And I think that was the sort of cherry on the top for what we were trying to do culturally within the organization. Listening, like I said, it's in itself, yeah, it can be valuable, but alone, it's probably not enough. In fact, it's definitely not enough. It needs to be followed by action. And where that action isn't possible, and this is part of the listening, and then the communication piece, where that action isn't possible, you need to have a conversation with your colleagues and explain why we are doing something, but equally why we aren't doing something. I don't think people expect every suggestion that they make in an organization to be implemented. Certainly based on some of the suggestions I've had over the years, I hope they don't. I sometimes think it's a test to see if I'm paying attention. But I think what they do expect, and rightly, by the way, I really believe this, they should be able to expect that their views have been heard and they've been considered, whether that is considered in a minute, an hour, a day, or it takes a week, a month, a year to fully consider what they've said. I do think people in every single organization are owed that. Many other things, by the way. But if you action what you've heard, and sometimes the action is, great idea, Ben, we're not doing that for these 3 reasons, that's fine. Sometimes it's, Ben, that has the potential to be transformative for our business. Can you tell me more? Right, let's pull together a steering group, a working party. Let's bring this to life, because that could transform our business. Action can look completely different dependent upon what the suggestion is. So you need to listen. You need to action. Sometimes you need to communicate before you action. It depends what the action is, obviously. But I guess on the communication bit, I am constantly reminded that you cannot communicate enough in an organization. It's certainly something that I'm guilty of. You literally, as a leader, cannot communicate enough. You need to explain the direction of travel, the reasons behind a decision, the organization's priorities, the role that individuals play in achieving all of that, and recognize as leaders that communication isn't a one-off event. You can't communicate something once and assume everyone's going to understand it. You need to communicate it, repeat it, reinforce it, and in many ways, campaign for it over time. Because when people understand where the organization is going, they're likely, certainly I have experienced this to be the case, to contribute to that journey. They gain clarity, confidence, and that ability to really contribute in a way that they wouldn't if they didn't understand all of those things that come from very honest, very frank conversations about bringing your team in and then with you. So, again, probably not for the first time in this podcast, Ben, a long answer. The culture was the thing that had the biggest impact on the business, I think, over the last 6 years. There were a number of component parts that underpinned that and brought it to life. Perhaps none more so than I really genuinely hope people across our organization, where perhaps they may have in the past felt they didn't, but today are certain that they not only have a voice, that voice is heard, and the best ideas make it through to being actioned, and we celebrate the contribution that people make as a result of them saying what they think and us actioning what I hope are the best decisions.
A long answer, but very considered and very good answer, I think. I interviewed a guy a couple of weeks ago now, it might be about 6-8 weeks by the time the pod comes out, called Matt Turner from Clownfish Events, and he had a brilliant business, and a lot of his stuff was all about culture, very similar, echoing to what you were saying. And one of the questions I asked him, though, was that he had a business of 30 to 40 people. I don't know how many the Stage Electrics group collectively now is, 150, 200, maybe a bit more than that.
We're about 150, 155 people.
So how do you, in a business of 30 people, Dave can know everyone. Dave can go around and see everyone. Dave knows when somebody's kid's sick. Dave knows when somebody's dog isn't well, or whatever that might be. When you get to 150 and you've got remote offices, how do you keep that culture going when you're not in that office? Obviously, senior management team, but how do you instill that through all your people at a constant size constant place when you're the size you are and how you're scaling?
I think within your question is the answer. It is through your senior executive, your management, your leadership teams, and the people across the organization who understand their role, their responsibility, both in terms of their day-to-day responsibility, their job-specific role and responsibility, but also through that culture and values training, they're very clear on what that looks like. So it shouldn't be, in fact, it must never be down to one person um, to take full responsibility for a culture being alive in an organization. That's the job of every single person at Stage Electrics Group. And I think our teams understand that, and they know what that looks like. They know what good looks like. They know what great looks like. So you've got senior executive, management teams, and people across the organization that are there to make that something real. I think on numbers of people, I'm always keen for our business to grow. I hope it will grow. I think 150 to 250 people, from experience at least, is sweet spot. So I'm fairly confident that I know the name of every single person in our organization. I'm fairly confident I could tell you something about every single person in our organization because part of my job is to get to know my colleagues, right? In the same way as I hope they get to know me a little bit. So I think we're still lucky in the sense that you can have that connection as a chief executive with your colleagues that perhaps you can't when you're 250 plus. It becomes harder, certainly for someone like me with my memory. But I've worked in organizations before where we've employed 250 to 300 people, and I could reasonably confidently say the same thing about then. I knew everybody's name, could tell you something about each person because I was genuinely interested in the people that I work with. It's very much the same at Stage Electrics. I like the people I work with, and I like getting to know them.
People are the key to every business, as you've already said, right? Do Stage Electrics hire for culture and the right culture fit or skills fit?
Increasingly, I think the honest answer is cultural fit. That in itself is a journey, right? When you first introduce a company culture and you've got the pressures of recruiting, that they change actually, the pressures around recruitment. But I think instinctively people go, can they do the job on paper? If they can, they're the right person. We've seen countless times now, you can't really teach someone to get it culturally. You either do or you don't. Yeah, sure, we can all learn and develop in that area, but it's easier to teach someone the skills than it is to teach someone who is going to be a misfit in your organization not to be a misfit. So we today recruit culture first, skills second. The sweet spot, of course, and the desire is to find someone who does both. By the way, that's not impossible at all. We've just moved a lot further away from this person ticks all the boxes that are required to be ticked to fulfill the role, and we've moved away from that, and we've added another big box that says, are they a cultural fit with our organization? Because if they're not, it's not going to work out for them or their colleagues or the company. And at that point, you've wasted their time and your own time.
And I suppose that you talk about misfits, right? The worst case scenario is you've got a high performer who's brilliant, but is an absolute not brilliant cultural wise, whatever, insert exclusive, whatever you want to do. How do you deal with that? Because there's the sort of prima donna, if you put it to a football term, the Ronaldo might be the best player in the world, but is he the greatest team player? I don't know that he is. Or do you just have to accept that and move on? And what's that sort of, those lessons around that? What have you learned from that, and how have you dealt?
I'll tell you a story about a radio station that no longer even exists. So
I'm not going to get sued. I don't have a legal team to back me up. Fine,
yeah.
that's good.
So neither one of us are going to get sued. And I don't think I even need to use names. So everyone will remain anonymous. This was, gosh, I don't know, 10 years ago. And the company that I worked for at the time, I was at that point the group content director. We had, I don't know, 15, 16 radio stations based across the UK. And I would typically spend my time between radio stations working with the content teams within those radio stations. And as part of that role, I worked closely with the managing directors of each of the radio stations. I took a call one afternoon from a managing director, and they said, I've done something that on the face of it is going to appear like I've gone mad, but I want to assure you I haven't. Those are the sorts of calls you go, oh, God, deep breath, brace yourself. What's happened? And long and the short of it, they had let go their best performing salesperson. And this salesperson outperformed every other salesperson in that radio station by 2-1. They were superb, but they were bluntly a cultural misfit meets nightmare. They disrupted, they derailed, they undermined the manager, the management. They were out for themselves, not for their team. They were only interested in what was good for them. They didn't care about anyone else. And it would have been so easy for that managing director to turn a blind eye. This was a person, like I said, delivering double the sales that anyone else on the team was. But they recognized that if this continued, there was going to be more and more friction, frustration in that organization, and ultimately other good people would have left. So they took the decision to part ways with this person. Over the next, and it didn't happen overnight, but over the next 3 months, every single salesperson in that organization increased the revenue that they were securing each month. Not just because, sure, some of that person's clients had been distributed, but because they didn't have this person in the office that was frankly getting in the way of them performing. And the business actually went on to perform even better on a year-on-year basis and on a consolidated basis without that person. So I tell that story because I think it took real courage for that managing director to make that decision. And I've always reminded myself of it because it's easy to tell yourself that person will just leave them alone because they're so good. But actually, there's real damage to not addressing those things. And you don't know the potential of other people in a business until you've removed that person that is getting in the way of other people's potential and indeed the company's potential.
It's difficult. It's a bold decision, as you said. It's a really bold decision, but can be the best thing. Culture can be a buzzword, right? You can read about it. You can see everything everywhere about culture. What do you think are the biggest mistakes leaders make? You're obviously very studied on it, but if someone go, you see, oh, we should do some culture stuff. What's the biggest mistakes you see from leaders on it?
I guess I should have said this way earlier in the podcast, Ben. Please don't think for a second that I am an expert in this. I have spent an awful lot of time focused on it. I see the value in it. I believe in it. But I'm not an expert and I certainly don't get everything right. What's the biggest mistake that leaders make at chief executive level? Saying one thing, doing the other. It falls apart. As soon as the person at the top of an organization has one rule for them and one rule for everyone else, your culture is dead. So you have to lead by example. If you're not willing to do that, don't bother. don't even start the journey of trying to introduce a culture in your organization. So I think that would be the first thing that I would say. Then I've already said it earlier in our conversation. It's more than mouse mats and words on a wall. So I think there is a place for that, but it's only a small part of it. And then you've got to demonstrate and signpost to the people in the organization the value of introducing a company culture, how it's good for them, their colleagues, our customers, the company. And as soon as you do that, people, I found, begin to buy into it and want to contribute even more. But the biggest mistake is a chief exec thinking that, yeah, this is something my people do. It's not something I do. That's the biggest mistake I think you can make. Another mistake is thinking it's just words, a fancy AI scripted sentence or paragraph, and send it to everyone in an email on a Friday afternoon and think you're done. You're not.
If you were to leave stage lecture, I'm not breaking any news here, but
What
if
do
you
you
were to
know
leave,
then?
no, what I know nothing. If you were to be leaving stage lectures though, and you were walking into a new company, or stage lectures were going by a company that was struggling, what's the sort of first things you would be asking your new employees that you were in charge of?
Again, I'm afraid it's not particularly innovative. What should we stop doing? What should we start doing? What should we continue doing? I think I'd ask those three questions through the lens of colleague, customer, and the company. And we kind of touched on this earlier. The answers to those sorts of questions tell you a huge amount about how the people in the organization see the business. They're going to tell you what's causing them frustration, what might be missing, what people think is working well and what's worth protecting, all the stuff we talked about earlier. But also, I think that tells you something about the people giving you the answers, because they will consciously or subconsciously, directly or indirectly, be playing a part in that underperformance. Now, I work with a colleague who has a saying, I don't believe anyone comes to work to do a bad job. And I believe that. I really do. But if people don't know what good looks like, they can so easily be doing that bad job. So asking those three questions helps you understand where those people are. You start to understand what matters to them, how clear they are on the organization strategy, whether or not the organization has a strategy. I mean, often a business that's not performing is not performing because no one knows what we're doing, where we're going. Why would we want to go where we think we're going? And ultimately how invested they are in that company's success. And it's the answers to those questions that I think would probably help me quite quickly understand what's driving that underperformance. And again, back to a couple of questions ago, at that point, you begin to go, what needs protecting, what needs challenging, what needs changing? And that's when the hard work really begins.
And you talk about that challenging piece. As a employee, you have these days, the stage lectures days, the group days, and that must be a time for you as leaders to listen to your employees. Mm-hmm. How do you develop a culture that would, which allows people to feel safe? I like the Netflix. I like a lot of the Netflix culture stuff. There's a lot of material out there, and they have a challenge where you can challenge anyone. You can challenge the CEO as a T-boy, whatever, and they're made to feel safe because that's how it works. But that can be quite a new environment for a lot of people. So how do you think you can create that culture to make people feel safe to challenge that senior leadership?
I mean, simply, Ben, you just demonstrate that that's okay. And the way that you do that is you encourage it, you celebrate it when it happens, and you keep encouraging it. I mean, we do town halls every month, company days, whenever it might be. We're constantly asking for questions, the good, the bad, the ugly. I would much rather answer a difficult question on a one-to-one basis in a small team at a company event than someone think that they know the answer when perhaps they need more background, more context to better inform them as to why we've done something or why we haven't done something. So we demonstrate that challenge is welcome. That's what we do. And we genuinely appreciate it when it happens. And I think when people see it happen, and it takes real courage, certainly in the early days when you're trying to establish something like this, it takes real courage because everybody's watching, going, is that person about to get fired? Is that person, about to be, I don't know, embarrassed or ignored? And when you don't dismiss them, when you don't embarrass them, when you don't ignore them, when you take that question and you deal with it head on, and you not only do that, but you thank the person for raising it, because so often it's a question that pretty much everybody else in the room wanted to ask. They just didn't have in that moment the courage. People go, oh, okay, this is all right. Of course it is. It blows my mind that people would think that leaders would think that it's not a good thing for their teams to be able to ask difficult questions, because it is so often the case that when those difficult questions are asked, it leads to the best answer that sometimes doesn't come from the leader alone, and ultimately the best outcome follows that too.
Sat in businesses, I won't name which ones, but where there's no questions on the town hall, and I sit there, and as a senior leader or leader in those businesses, you turn around and go, well, somebody's got to have a question, but you've got to have that sense of openness that actually I'm not going to get fired, or I'm not going to be pulled into a back room because I've asked a difficult question. And you need to develop that.
Yeah, you do. And I think, you need to reflect that, when things are tough in an organization, and they will be tough for every organization, sometimes things are good, sometimes things are not so good. And it's those periods where things are not so good. I think you need to double down on your communication. You need to double down on that open door policy that really is, in effect, saying anyone can come up to you and ask any questions. Because if people feel that they can't challenge you, they're not really leading the organization. You've simply got a bunch of people that report to you. And, you've only got to look at how things can go wrong, in the military, for example, where you've got people reporting, but not actually suggesting, and you've got people back at base making decisions that people on the ground and how things can go wrong. It's the same sort of thing. So yeah, we encourage it. And personally, Ben, I love it. I really love it. I like being part of an organization where people can ask questions, and I work with incredible people, and there's more than a handful of people that I work with who will go out their way to ask difficult questions, not because they're trying to be difficult, but because they want to know, or they know that other people in the business want to know, and those people are particularly valuable.
And do you, as a leader, always try and be, I'm sure you are, as honest as you can be? Because as a leader, sometimes there are commercially sensitive, legally sensitive and things. And I suppose you've got to try and be as open as you can be with that within the confines, because there must be things where you go, you must have said in a town hall, I honestly can't tell you the answer because of this reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, that doesn't happen very often. So it's been 6 years since I worked in another organization. So I don't have an immediate reference point, but in all of our town halls, we share, for example, the financial performance of the company on a month-by-month basis. So we're sharing management accounts. We do that across each one of the businesses. Therefore, we're sharing how we're performing to budget or not, dependent upon the business, how well that business is performing. And that often leads to questions, sometimes difficult questions. And we've always taken the view that unless it's entirely inappropriate. So things I will never talk about. I'm never going to talk about someone's salary. Just, there is no need for anyone else other than the person that is being employed to know what their salary is. Of course, their partner will probably know, but no one else in the organization needs to know. I'm not going to talk openly and publicly about conversations we're having when it comes to acquisitions, because, well, firstly, I've signed an NDA. And to your point earlier, there's some commercial sensitivities around that. But I will answer, if someone said, are we buying a business at the moment? I will answer that question in the moment as honestly as I can. And I will, to your point, sometimes say, there's only so much I can say about this. But what I can say is, we are constantly in conversations with other business owners about them being part of our group. And when I've got something that I can say with certainty, you'll be the first to know. And I hope that our people would recognize that they are the first to know. When these things happen, we tell them first. And that, again, I think builds trust. So there's occasionally something that we can't say, but I think even perhaps to the surprise of colleagues, there's very little we won't share, because we employ adults. Every single person we employ is an adult. And why would you not want to treat them like that? And I don't think it matters who you are or where you sit in the organization. The more information that you can have about that company, the direction of travel, the strategy, the why, what it means when we get there, what does that look like? What's your role in ensuring that we achieve the objective we've set? The more clarity you can provide around that, the more contribution that individual can make. If you've got a bunch of people sat in your organization who go, I don't know, ask my manager, I don't know, ask the senior executive, I don't know, ask the chief exec. That is not a group of people who are as armed as they could be to contribute as much as I believe our people do, because they're empowered through the information that we share with.
There's loads of questions I want to ask in the back of it. We're running out of time. Dave looks in 20 years' time from now. What would be proud? What would make you prouder? Being remembered for the businesses you've helped grow, or the people you've helped? It's not the quick fire answer, but that's a great quick fire answer to that.
Yeah, and look, I get, you've said it in this podcast already, Ben. People are business, business are people. So I guess if I want to be cute, develop people, you develop businesses, right? But people, I mean, I think being a leader of any organization is it's such a privilege. It's an honor, really. And I think if you can positively contribute to the people that you work with lives by helping them grow, by helping them develop, that's good for them. It's good for their colleagues. It's good for our customers. It's good for the company. And it's the most rewarding aspect of my work. Seeing the people I work with do well, nothing beats that. Nothing beats that.
Final question of the main questions. It's called the Business Takeaway Podcast. I ask everyone this. What's your sort of one golden rule? What's your one? If people listen to this point in time and go, what's Dave's one lesson for life?
There's a quote I like by, what's his name? Arnold H. Glaso, I think. I hope I've pronounced that right. And the quote goes something like, a good leader takes a little more than their share of the blame and a little less than their share of the credit. And that resonates a lot with me, because I think it captures something that I've over the years really begun to really strongly believe, that leadership isn't about you. It's about your team. It's about the team that you're leading. It's about the people that you're working with. So when things go well, you credit the people who made it happen. And more often than not, that's not you. And when things go not so well, that's when the leaders need to step forward, take responsibility, ask themselves what they could have done differently. And that doesn't mean removing accountability. Quite the opposite, actually. It means creating an environment where people feel safe enough to take responsibility, learn from their mistakes, improve, and keep moving forward. Or NAF management speak for a second, Ben, I guess, to put it another way. Leadership is less about being the hero of the story and more about creating the conditions for others to write their pages of that story. And that's why I like that quote, because it sort of keeps you grounded. And I think it reminds you fundamentally what a leader is there to do. And a leader, I believe, is there to work for the people that they lead.
And I think that's an amazing end to the main questions. Now, as I said at the start, the rapid fire questions are coming up.
Yes.
You said you were looking forward to this more than the rest of it. So let's see how we go. Are you an Apple or Android user?
Apple.
Social media platform of choice?
Instagram.
Would you rather have a beach or city break?
City.
Would you rather travel first class or save them? And there can be two answers, whether it's the company money or your money as well with that.
It depends. And talking exclusively about if I'm spending the money, it just depends. If I'm on my own, I will travel in the cheapest way possible. If I'm traveling with my partner, Kate is always going to be campaigning for a slightly better seat than the one that I want to pay for.
When's traveling, what's the one thing you could never leave without?
My phone. Sorry, it's sad, but it's true.
Are you a morning or night person?
Morning.
Build something new or fix what's broken?
Fix what's broken.
Gut instinct or data-driven?
Can I be both, Ben? Sorry.
You can. No.
Sorry. Yeah, 50-50.
Growth or profitability?
Profitability.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever ignored?
Probably something like don't do it. I can't think about easily, at least, what that thing I shouldn't have done that I did do was, but almost certainly the best piece of advice I didn't follow was don't do it. Here you go. I shouldn't have. My mate, when I was what would I have been 9 years old, told me, don't follow me up this conker tree to pick conkers from the tree, because there's a high chance that you'll fall out of the tree. And sure enough, I did fall out of the tree and I broke both my arms and dislocated my shoulder. So there you go. That was
been some good advice to follow.
Yes, would have been. Yeah.
And very finally, I'm standing at a bar, at a trade show or in a pub. What is the drink that I'm buying you?
A non-alcoholic Guinness at the moment. Have you? I don't know if you drink, Ben, or if you like Guinness. But if anyone listening likes Guinness, my Irish friends and colleagues will shoot me for this, but I think the non-alcoholic Guinness is better than the real one. So yeah, I'll have a non-alcoholic Guinness, please, Ben.
Mic drop to end that. Yes. I've cut down a lot of my drinking. This industry has been famous for that, but I've cut down. And the 0% stuff, I swear by, is as nice, or if not better, than the real stuff.
Agreed. And it's gotten so much better it feels like only the last 3 years. I mean, 5 years ago, it was dreadful, wasn't it? But Guinness in particular, I think is, like I say, it's as good, if not better. And like you know, some of the lagers are equally as good as their real full fat versions.
And it's becoming everywhere. My role takes me around Europe, around the world. I can find 0% virtually everywhere now, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Dave, thank you so much. I have when I do the prep for these interviews, I have a whole lot of questions, and we've only covered about a quarter of it, which is great, which is fine. That's how it's meant to be. But some absolute gems and some really good things there. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much.
Ben. Thank you, Ben. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. That's it for today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed listening to the show and listening to Dave. Had some amazing views on culture, business, growth, people, and how you go about it. And I'm sure a lot to take away from it. If you enjoyed this episode of the Business Takeaway podcast, please do take a moment to subscribe to the show so you never miss a future episode. And if you found value in what you've heard today, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a little rating and a review. It really does help more people discover the show and allows us to continue to bringing you great content. If you've enjoyed today's show and haven't listened before, please do go back through the back catalogue and have a listen to some of our previous recordings. And also make sure you share this episode with friends or family or colleagues who you think would really enjoy it too. You can connect with us on social media and let us know your thoughts on today's show and give us questions or suggestions for future episodes and future guests. We'd really love to hear from you. So thanks again to listening to the Business Takeaway podcast, and we'll see you on the next show.